Welcome everyone to People Keeping It Sacred, our new program highlighting people who are keeping it sacred in the world. I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, founder of Keeping It Sacred, and I'm so excited to introduce to you today's guest, the Reverend Dr. Sarah Halverson Cano. Welcome. Reverend Dr. Sarah Halverson Cano has been the pastor at Fairview Community Church, a congregation of both the American Baptist churches and the United Church of Christ, since 2006. The church is proudly progressive in conservative Orange County. With the strong ministry of social justice, she has served on the board of Southern California's ACLU, Progressive Christians Uniting, Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, and is currently the president of the Newport Mesa Irvine Interfaith Council. Reverend Dr. Sarah will soon begin service as a senior pastor at Irvine United Congregational Church. She and her partner in life, Marquise Halverson Cano, met on a church mission group in Guatemala and share a love of Central America and their two children. I can't wait to hear more about how you're keeping it sacred. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Your ministry has really been one of emphasizing both being a great pastor. I mean, what you're doing for during COVID for your congregants. I mean, going out, driving to their driveways and visiting with them. I'm just so inspired by that, to be that kind of a pastor, to be present for people, to be a great priest, in the church as well, to lead services and to lead people through their ability to express gratitude to God and to guide them in Jesus as you do, but then also to really emphasize this prophetic role that you do in speaking justice. Tell me a little bit about how you kind of think about balancing all of those, and what you think the relevance of the prophetic tradition is today.
I recognize that not every pastor, maybe every rabbi, every religious leader feels that call. But for me, it's innate in my call to ministry and my desire to just be a human being in this world. I relate it back to my faith, and that's what compels me. But I think that for me, I could not be a Christian if I weren't working, to use Christian language, working for the kingdom or manifesting shalom, doing that work to heal our world. And I have a hard time with the Christianity that really sees this as a personal journey, because it's both, right? So we see some Christian traditions that are really singular, and it's all about personal salvation. And for me, it has to be about a collective salvation for a world. So to not work for justice, I don't think would be fulfilling my role. And then, of course, as a pastor, we do have I have a pastoral obligation. I have Ensure in my car, and I'll be delivering that to one of my parishioners after this gathering. So I think there's this desire to help people and care for those who are among us, but also recognizing that we have a responsibility to the community around us. And so the prophetic, I mean, it's the prophets that drive me, and Jesus as that prophet who did the very same in his day and time and calls us to do that in ours. And I don't think I could be a Christian if I didn't pursue this path.
Beautiful.
I think that being called to a community is more than being called to a church. And so as I transition, I'm in the middle of transitioning from Fairview Community Church to Irvine United Congregational Church. But what remains the same is this commitment to Orange County, and that as a pastor, we're called to the community, to the religious institution that will be paying our bills and ensuring that we survive. And yet we're also called to something bigger than that. And that's been really important for me, and sometimes a challenge for the folks that I'm working for and with, but a reminder that that's what I believe we are called to do, is to do that work in community, because otherwise we're working in a silo, and that wasn't what God intended, I don't think.
Tell me about some of those most meaningful moments you've had working in community and working for justice on a broader scale.
I think really integral to my ministry has been that with the LGBT community. For one piece, back in 2008, my congregation became officially open, welcoming, and affirming. They weren't prior to my arrival, and just a couple of years in, they made that decision in February of 2008. And then in May of 2008, there was the announcement that that Prop 22 would be overturned and we'd be allowed to marry people in days. And then days later, the Proposition 8 came up, and we realized that we weren't going to get to celebrate for very long. We'd have to start fighting. And people used to always just assume I must be a lesbian, because why would I be doing this work? And so I think it's really important that we recognize MLK again, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that we have to experience injustice as though it is an injustice upon ourselves so that we can fight for one another, because ultimately it is a threat to all of us. So I think working to fight Prop 8, and then when we finally did get marriage equality, those were some of the most compelling and really powerful days of my ministry, and the community that was formed out of it, the celebrations that came. A memorable moment would be when California finally passed, and I was able to marry a couple on the Orange County courthouse steps the day that we got the news. And then a few days later, returned to those steps and signed the license. And I know that as I was doing that, you were doing the same. I mean, my favorite story about you is that not only did you get married, but you turned around and married the people behind you, so that they could have, a meaningful, memorable moment. So I think that's been really powerful for me. A really big piece of my ministry. And then I do a lot of work with economic justice and working in the labor community. And, you and I have crossed paths there as well, trying to really speak out and speak with and help pass the microphone whenever we can, so that voices that don't often get heard get heard. We see so many situations of intimidation in the workplace, and particularly within the Latino and immigrant community, where false information is passed along in order to scare people into submission of sorts. And I think that doing that work is a really important and necessary work for those of us within the faith traditions, to lift up the strength that we find in our faith, and that to remind people that we have a moral obligation to care for one another and ensure that our community is uplifting everyone and not taking advantage of them, or simply by silence and acquiescence allowing injustice to take place.
I love that you have such a deep solidarity and such a long, history. It's not like, what I love about your leadership is, like you said, you pivot to what is needed when, but it's not like you pick up a hot topic and then put it down and go to the next. Like, you're in deep solidarity with everybody at the same time and are addressing each need as they come up. And I think that that's such a beautiful model for relationship, like, that you've created such a deep set of relationships in Orange County, and those relationships will go with you wherever you go now to your new congregation, and and being able to to continue the relationships based on trust. So how do you deal with the disappointments that are inherent to being that prophetic voice of trying to lift up justice in a world that increasingly, it seems, doesn't? Or what's helpful for you? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think that's why I felt so called to Orange County. So many times in my ministry, people say, wouldn't you be more comfortable in San Francisco or Berkeley or even Long Beach? And it's like, well, yeah, Long Beach is a different world. I probably would be more comfortable there, but I really feel the need here. And so there's something about just feeling called to do the work, even when the work is hard and it's slogging and they're leaving messages and emailing things, or literally protesting outside the church, calling me a witch or worse. I think it's true. It's inherent in the work. And maybe that's why not everyone is called to do the prophetic piece of it. But for me, that's the call. And, you know, here I am, Lord. I always joke, you know, they killed my guy. So like, if I thought this was going to be easy, they hung him on a cross. So I think it would be naive to think that this was going to be easy. And I tell my congregation that all the time, you know, not everyone has to be Christian, but this is a hard path. So if you want to do this, you got to pick up the cross. And I don't think everyone likes to hear that in Orange County. I don't think they want that. And so I think it's a difficult road. And yet somehow I've always come back to the well and felt like I could keep going. And maybe there'll be a time where it will be too much, but I think ultimately it's coming back to this belief that this is what we're called to do for each other, because this God in me believes that the God in you and the yous all around here matter, and that we have to do something to make this world a better place. So I'm able to keep at it, and I feel really called here. And so I'm so thankful as I do transition that I'm staying in Orange County so I can keep doing this work, because this is the place that needs it. And as appalling as it is right now with the mask stuff, I happened to be at the Orange County Board of Supervisors a few weeks ago and wrote a couple of op-eds about that experience. But it's getting worse. You know, it's vile, and there's this inability to see humanity for what, you know, that we're one of the same. We're human beings, and that vitriol is so bad that we have to be able to say, I won't stand for that. That's not who I am. And if enough of us say that, we'll have a collective that will speak against it. And I suppose in some ways, the more vitriolic it gets, the more we recognize it and can see it. But I think that being called to Orange County means facing that, and I'm aware of it. And I feel that this is what I'm called to do. So I make it through.
Beautiful. Now, I wondered a little bit about, you know, a lot of times clergy can get into some trouble around talking politics on the pulpit, or what people see as talking politics, right? I wondered, have you gotten that, and how do you address that?
Of course I've gotten that. I think people have pegged me as the political pastor, and I used to really try to reframe that. And I don't try to do that anymore, because people are going to say what they're going to say. So then I remind them that it comes from the Greek word polis, of the city, of the community. And that's okay, then I will be of the community, and I'll then accept that. But I think what's so important, you know, to the IRS, I am nonpartisan. And I think that's what religious institutions, we need to have that very important separation of church and state, which I very much believe in. But what I think we have to do is to speak about the issues. And people that don't, I think, are failing. And I don't mean to be just so biting about it and cutting, perhaps, but I do think that when we fail to address the issues of our society, we become completely irrelevant. And I think that is why people have left in mass exodus from my tradition, or from religious institution in general, because they don't find it relevant. It's no longer speaking to the needs of society. And in a culture like ours, where we're really in a post-religious world, why would you participate if it didn't have any meaning and significance in your life beyond, in our case, Sunday morning? So people call me the political pastor all the time. And I just want to remind folks that I'm nonpartisan. And that's the piece that, as far as anyone wagging a finger regarding legalities is concerned. And I think that if we don't, you know, social gospel is to have the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other. And if we don't address what's happening in our world, we're irrelevant. And I don't want to be irrelevant.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's one of the core principles of keeping it sacred too, is that accessibility, relevance, and empowerment. That's the kind of community that I'm trying to build, that we're all trying to build here. What do you wish people knew about Christianity as it's lived by you and the communities that you serve?
I think that there is such a preconception about what Christianity is, and particularly a rise of a dominant view of what Christianity is today. And I really want to say that there is a Christianity that doesn't need to be literalistic, that can see the text as inspired by God and inspiring with God, even conspiring with God, that we can find our faith to be something that's transformative, but we're not rigid, that we can have even a pluralistic tradition. And I think, I'm a Christian pluralist that really values other religions and having this kind of experience and the relationship that you and I have, because I don't think that my faith is threatened by yours. And we see a lot of people,
right?
yeah. And I think it's interesting that's the reason. It goes back to this like whole defensiveness and insecurity. And I really can't fathom a God that would work that way. Is God that insecure? Was Jesus that insecure? Jesus was Jewish. And so what happened there? So I think that I really want to talk about how do we go back to some core principles. I did my academic work. I worked on a PhD for several years before I decided to go to seminary. It was in the New Testament, studied the historical Jesus. So I think that we can have a very intelligent faith. We like to say at Fairview that we don't check our brains at the door. And I think that's really important, is for people to know that Christians can believe in science, can be intellectuals, can ask questions, are not afraid of doubt, that doubt can be a motivator and a way of revealing and going deeper into self and then further experiencing God by doing so. And I think just knowing that Christianity doesn't have to be in a box. And I think there's something that's still really valuable in this tradition, and I wouldn't be in it. I would walk away easily if I didn't believe that.
And Christianity doesn't have to be in a box, and you don't have to be in a box to be a Christian either.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that we can find value. I did this whole interfaith series, interfaith dialogue days, where we would have our dialogue in the midst of our worship service, not just I think there was a distinction to make, that it wasn't just an afternoon or evening educational hour, that we wanted to do it within the worship service. And, over the years that got a lot of hate mail, particularly when we brought the Wiccans in, or Muslims in. I don't think there was as much pushback when Rabbi Einstein came, but this idea that we can be enhanced by one another like that. To me, I guess I'm so far gone that I think that we only get better when we learn more and we connect deeper. But I think there's a very limited perspective about Christianity that gets most of the media attention or just the church attention. I don't know. They made major headway, and the rest of us back down. When we look at a trajectory of what happened with mainline Christianity over the last 70 years, there's been a release of power, and so many people just left because it stopped being relevant. Mm-hmm. So I would say there's still it's a still relevant, authentic tradition that is rooted in antiquity, yet alive and fresh today, that has a word of truth to speak out to our world and our community. It's not just for the boomers and those who are older. There's actually something for Gen Xers and millennials and Zoomers that might actually be transformative if we do it together. And I believe in it.
Absolutely. I can feel that you totally believe in that. And it's a lot of the way I feel about Judaism too. Absolutely. It's like, we can benefit from this long standing tradition and continue to, I'm a Reform Jew, so we say reform it and reform it again, right? Like continue to aid it in its evolution across humanity as the world changes, right? Like the adjusting to the technologies, right? Like the prayer book was a new invention in the 1500s when the printing press came around and people were like, well, I don't know about this. Like, no,
Right.
like, let's welcome that. And we are the people of the book, right? We're not the people of the scroll anymore. We're the people of the book. And soon we'll be the people of the website known as Sepharia, which has all of our sacred texts on it. But, you know, the idea of that. And also I love that your perspective on questioning, right? We call ourselves the people of the book, or maybe we're the people of the question, right?
Right.
Be able to analyze it and take a critical eye to our sacred texts, to our ancient texts and the wisdom as rational moderns as we are, and also still come back and say, wow, there is so much beauty here, and it can enhance our lives, and it can give us purpose and meaning. And, you know, and you can do it through your traditional, you know, frameworks, and I can do it through my traditional frameworks, and we're building who we are as individuals, coming to meaning in our lives. So I love that. Well, tell me about these caterpillars that you've had at your house.
Oh my goodness. The caterpillars have saved quarantine. So, you know, I was looking on Facebook, and all these great parents were doing things to support their children, and I was working full time trying to keep my life together and get my husband through nursing school. And so I, you know, originally I found this caterpillar, but it wasn't actually a caterpillar, it was a moth. And so somebody, some kind person gave us some caterpillars. And I would keep going back to the little habitat that they're in. I would just watch these caterpillars. And for me, it became a real meditation, a grounding point. Through all of this chaos, I would just come back and watch these caterpillars. And it's this microcosm of life. Here they were doing what they were meant to do, eat, and they eat, and they eat, and they eat, and they were growing. And then they take this time where for 2 weeks, they just form this chrysalis and stand still. And so it would just remind me that we can stand still. And then, you know, this metaphor that Christianity loves to take is from the butterfly of resurrection. All of a sudden, they break out. And they're this new, different being that is the same and yet different. And I get to witness all of it right there in my home, watch this miracle happen, quiet my mind from all of the stuff that's out there and all of the demands in my home that's in there in my home of craziness with 2 children. And everything gets quiet and beautiful. And it's just such a powerful experience. I've loved every minute of it. So we got it for my daughter, but my husband and I are the ones that really love it. And he's got to go out. They're hungry caterpillars. So he has to go find milkweed. And there's no milkweed in town because everybody wants the same thing. So he has to go out literally in search of them with his scissors and cut milkweed.
That's so funny. Yeah, for the high holidays, actually preached a sermon that did talk about the hungry caterpillar. And the idea of, you know, just each of us being able to transform ourselves and transform again and to become this beautiful thing, even as we start off as ravenous hunger for life, you know, and then just to be still and then stretch our wings and be who we are. I think it's such a beautiful message for even for children, of course, with, you know, the science project aspect of it, but for adults too, to remember we can keep being born into who we are. Actually, in the Talmud right now, there's a page that we're reading in Tractate Shabbat, which talks about a baby and it talks about how if a baby is ill when it's born, the day of his healing should be considered the day of his birth. And so I was just thinking about that, right? Like the day of our birth doesn't have to be the only birth that we have in our lives, right? We can, I know in Christianity, there's like the concept of being born again, but in Judaism also just the idea that we can every year come to the high holidays and reflect on who we are and who we've been. And it's that moment of chrysalis. It's that holiday season of being in chrysalis, of just being still and considering what your life has been and considering in what ways do we need to stretch ourselves and grow.
And shed ourselves. I have found it to be the lifeline for quarantine. I have learned so many lessons just watching these caterpillars and taking the whole world away and zeroing in. And I had no real understanding of the process before, just the vague things that I learned in The Hungry Caterpillar. But now I just see these parallels over and over and over again, and how if we go in, I mean, this is this incredible life, and that we can stop and we can pause and we can focus and we can see miracles among us. You know, I mean, for me, it's like, I don't need miracles that are of biblical proportion. That's great. It's a good story and it teaches me something, but there's this real miracle happening right now in a habitat in my home. And then those miracles are happening in us if we would only take the time to look at it and let ourselves experience it. So having butterflies has changed my life.
I think really, you know, and society is really doing that too. I think that quarantine has really provided that forced chrysalis moment for us to just, everybody stop what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what you've been doing. Think about what the heart of what you've been doing is and figure out how to exist in this new world, right? Like meeting with you and, you know, like maintaining our relationship and making sure that we can still talk with each other, right? Great. Zoom is for that, or FaceTime, or just, you know, I'm going to walk outside and then call you on the phone. We're going to take a walk together, but just at the same time, but on the phone together, right? Like being able to get to the heart of what we're trying to actually do in the world, and to forcing us to rethink it. I think society is really doing that, especially I think about with regard to public safety, right? And Black Lives Matter, and realizing that the way that we've been doing public safety, we're all paused right now and thinking, wait a minute, this has really not been working for us. Let's reimagine, right? Who would be able to reimagine that a little worm-like caterpillar could transform into a butterfly? You have to really imagine that. If someone told you that's what happened, you wouldn't believe. Like you told me, these little guys, their heads get chopped off, and I'm trying to look, I'm like, really? You can't imagine that this is what would happen. So I think with public safety even, right? Like it's hard for us to imagine, but God gave us the ability to imagine. It's time for us to really imagine and reimagine how the world can shift and change in a way that really does make it a safer world, a world rooted in wellness for everybody, and think about what that could look like. I think, you know, societally, we've been really considering and reconsidering who we are and how we can, how we should continue on in this world. Wow. Well, tell me, where can our audience members find you? What projects do you want them to know about?
Well, you can find me until the end of the summer at Fairview Community Church in Costa Mesa in Orange County. And I believe in this church. I love this congregation. So if you're anywhere near, you should come. But then you can find me in the city over at Irvine United Congregational Church, which is another really wonderful congregation of folks who are excited about having these conversations and, you know, really eager to step into discomfort in order to make the world better, starting where we are. So I'll be there, and you can find me on the streets with a picket sign and a bullhorn, because I'll be fighting the mask. And a mask. Yeah. I'm a little less on the streets these days, but because I think that we need to be doing this work here. But I'll be around in Orange County, and I don't think they can get rid of me anytime soon. So doing the work of Jesus, doing the work of God, spreading that prophetic message.
So beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of your righteousness, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. If you have someone that you'd like to recommend that I host on the show, please contact us at rabbiheathermiller.com. There you can also sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date with all that we're programming, opportunities to study together, and more. Thank you, everyone, for keeping it sacred. Be well.